Yeah.
Okay, so this is just sort of a note in advance. So this is ever since EFAs. Everybody knows what an EFA is, right?
Why don't you tell us?
So EFAs, Education Freedom Accounts, the basic idea is similar to what happens in a lot of states, where you give some money to a kid's parent, and in exchange, he doesn't go to his local school. Now, he can still go to another school in a different district, but he can't go to his local school. Okay, and so across the country, different states are setting up different programs like this, and they're arguing over things like who should get them and who should not. Should it be everybody? Should it only be people who don't make enough money? Should it only be special needs students? So people are working that out. They're thinking about, well, how much should they get? Should they get the amount we spend on every student, or should they get some percentage of that? They're asking, what kinds of things can it be spent on? Just, absolute courses or schools or, karate lessons or skydiving or whatever. And this talk came from the fact that ever since this has been happening, there have been a lot of cheerleading, especially from libertarian groups. And just I've always had this feeling that, there's something that's not right about this. And this is the result of me thinking that through. So I'm sharing it with you. And actually, one of the things I want to get is feedback on where you think I might have gone wrong. So I look at what's happening and all the fights they're having, including the ones they're having in Concord, and I think of it, it's premature, and I think it's misguided, and I think it's a little like fighting over what color you should paint your perpetual motion machine. Maybe first you should find out if it's going to work. Okay, so next. So we're going to start with the magic trick. Next. So imagine there's a club, some kind of club. They're going to charter a boat to go across the lake, and the captain says it's $500. No matter how many people you got 5 people, 10 people, 15, 20, I don't care, it's $500. And so at the last moment, so they're figuring that's $50 a person, right? 10 people, $50 a person. So at the last minute, one of the guys goes, oh, I can't get on the boat, I have to do something first. I'll take an Uber for $20 and I'll meet you on the other side. And so the treasurer of the club goes, wow, that's really great news, because we were going to spend $50 for you to take the boat, and now we're only spending $20, so we saved $30. Anybody see the problem? Anybody not see the problem with this? Good. Next. So we can actually change this to make the numbers a little bigger and a little more realistic. We have the Newport School District. It's got a budget of 18 million bucks. It's got about 900 students. I'm just using really round numbers. These aren't the actual numbers, but 20,000 bucks per student, right? And so at the beginning of the year, 10 kids go, hey, I'm going to take an EFA for $5,000. And so, you can imagine the business administrator going, this is really good news, because, we'll take the $200,000 we didn't spend on you, and that'll more than pay for the $50,000 of your EFAs. We're going to save $150,000. And of course, if you're actually looking at the numbers, you're noticing that this is not what's going on. So to make it even stranger, next, we can look at the entire state. Okay, you pay about $3.7 billion for all the different school districts. You got about 160,000 students, around 4,200 students. So that's $23,000 per student on average, which is an amazing figure. And so about 4,200 students take EFAs, and they're not in the schools anymore. And so, my God, we're paying $22 million for the EFAs, but we're not spending $97 million. And so that's a savings of $75 million. It's the same calculation in all 3 cases. It's just as ridiculous in all 3 cases, but this is actually getting publicized. The Department of Education is running around saying, oh my God, EFAs are saving taxpayers $75 million every year. And that gets picked up by places like EdChoice or Reason Magazine. They're saying, look at this, EFAs are working, they're saving $75 million a year. But it's the same as the boat example. This is new spending. Nobody's saving nothing, okay? And so, next. So you probably realize what the problem is, right? That the districts do not spend money on students, except for a couple of examples, a couple of instances, which I'll talk about later. It's town tuitioning and some special education. They spend money to run a school. And if a kid leaves school, more kids come in. If it's small numbers, which is what you have with EFAs, it doesn't make any difference. They don't hire anybody, they don't fire anybody, it's the same cafeteria, same bus routes, everything's the same, right? And what this means is you hear these, there's a couple of phrases you hear a lot. And one of them is, well, with EFAs, the money follows the student. And the money doesn't follow the student. It stays in the school. They're still running the school. No money is following anybody. This is brand new money that somebody has to come up with to give to the student for the EFA. But nothing's being followed. So the second thing that I hear that has always frustrated me is this phrase, well, with EFAs, the parents can use their education dollars to do whatever they think is best for the kid. And it's like, well, they could always use their education dollars. That's never been an issue, just like they could use their clothing dollars and their housing dollars and their vacation dollars. EFAs are not them using their dollars, they're them using somebody else's dollars. And so, you know, as always, I would just plead for people to use the right words to describe what's going on. And to say a parent is using, those are my education dollars, well, no. They were taken from somebody by force who didn't want to give them to you. So, next. It even gets better, actually, because, so Jody and I looked up some of these numbers, and it turns out that only about 30% of the kids who take EFAs are actually leaving the school. Most of them are already out of school. They were either homeschooled, or they had left school for some reason. They were in private schools. So the magic numbers, the magic savings are even more imaginary, because 70% of them could not even have occurred. Nobody left anything. Nothing's happening there. And so, you know, this is the kind of thing, I look at this, and I would say the most interesting question to ask here is, so you look at the people in the Department of Education or Ed Choice or Reason, and you have to ask, do they not understand this? Or do they understand it and just hope that you don't? And which of those would be worse? Okay? So next. Libertarian walks into a UBI. So there's a guy named Seymour Papert. He's an artificial intelligence researcher, and he said something that I read a long time ago that I've always loved. He said, sometimes when you're thinking about something, it helps to think about something else instead. And the point of that is that when you're thinking about something that you really care about, you have a lot of emotions involved, you have a lot of common sense that you've picked up, and you sort of already know what the answer is supposed to be. And so it actually interferes with your ability to reason about it. And I found that this was happening with EFAs, that I was supposed to like them, and I was supposed to be for them, and it's like, but it's still bugging me. So I decided I would think about universal basic income instead. So everybody know what universal basic income is? It's the idea that basically you pick some number, this is what it costs to live in this country, and you give everybody that much, regardless of whether they need it. You make $1 million a year, I give you $50,000. You're broke, I give you $50,000. You make $70,000, I give you $50,000. And there are various different versions of this, but that's it. It's just everybody should have enough to live, and then they don't have to worry about things like, what kind of job do I have to have? I don't need to say that. So anyways, so next.
Found him.
Found him. So I put this here because I remember. So we had a guy. He stayed at Bardo for a while, and I can never remember his name, but he always reminds me of Waldo.
Carl.
Yeah,
Carl. Okay.
That's right.
Tall Carl. Whatever. Anyways, he always reminded me of Waldo, and I just have this vivid memory of one day when he's a libertarian, and he calls himself one, and he's like, I think universal basic income would be a good thing, and I'm just like, what? Why? And immediately I'm thinking, okay, you're a libertarian, so I guess we're going to forget about this whole redistribution thing, where to give that guy money, I have to take it from that guy, so apparently you're okay with that. And let's forget the whole inflation thing, where I'm just going to start throwing money at people and have them now competing for the same goods, which is, we just saw what happened during COVID. Let's just give everybody money and see what happens. What could go wrong there? So I was a little flabbergasted. So next. And so I thought about this, and it turns out this idea, universal basic income in various forms, has been around for a long time. Back in the 1500s, you had Thomas More writing about it in Utopia. Thomas Paine actually had some suggestions about what we might do around the revolution, and Milton Tommy Friedman wrote about it in Capitalism and Freedom. And the thing is, they were all sort of generally concerned with the same thing, which is, how do we alleviate the problem of poverty? Okay? Well, what they didn't agree on is, well, what do we mean by the problem of poverty? And you could generally class them into two groups. Some of them were taking a moral view and saying, poverty is terrible, and nobody should suffer from that, and it's just wrong. As humans, we should not let anybody go through that. But there were others who were making the argument like, well, the problem with poor people is they steal stuff, and they hurt people, and they cause trouble. So as a utilitarian kind of thing, we'd all be better off, and society would be more stable if we didn't have any poor people. But those are two very different assessments of the problem. And depending on which assessment you have, or whether there's a third or a fourth or a fifth, or some agreement that we could have of what the problem of poverty is, that will lead you in different directions in terms of, you know, how you're going to alleviate it. And I bring this up in connection with EFAs because we have a very similar problem with respect to education, which we might call the problem of stupidity. Okay, how do we alleviate the problem of stupidity? And the first thing you have to decide is, are we concerned that stupidity is a problem for the people who are uneducated, or it's a problem for the rest of us? Because those lead in very, very different directions. And I actually believe it's part of the reason we're in such a mess now, because we haven't decided that. There's a guy, Charles Kettering.
They're all
Tommy,
Thomas.
everybody's Tommy. Tommy Kettering once said something that I loved. He said, a problem well stated is half solved. And it just resonated with me as a mathematician, where anytime you have a problem, there's a temptation to sit down and start doing something, start calculating. But what you really want to do is stop and say, could I ask this in a different way? Could I see it visually? Could I see it in terms of changes? Or could I see it in terms of static things? Or could I take a bigger, more general case or a more specific case? So you're always saying, how can I ask this question so that I end up with a question where even if the answer isn't obvious, I at least see what the answer has to look like and what shape it would take and how big or small it would be. In contrast, Zig Ziglar, who some of you may have heard of, he used to say that a problem that's unstated can only be solved by accident. And I think with regard to stupidity and poverty, that is exactly where we are now. We don't even know what problem we're trying to solve. So we run around and kind of hope that we stumble into some solution, but since we don't know what the problem is, we will never actually know whether we've solved it. So I think that's where we are now. So next. So when I asked Waldo, so why is this a good idea? He said, oh, well, if you give people money, they can buy the things they need. They can buy housing, they can buy heat, they can buy clothing, they can buy food, and then we won't need all these special agencies that we have to give different kinds of welfare. And I'm like, okay, I can see how that's a very attractive idea, but, me being me, the first thing I thought of was, okay, next. So you get this guy, he's like, okay, you gave me my money, I spent it on lottery tickets, now what? Right? What are you going to do with this guy? This is a serious problem. And there are three ways that we might go with this. And the first way is we might just say, well, we've decided to make failure legal again. And so if you don't have a family or some friends or a community or a church or something that is interested in keeping you alive, you're just SOL and you're going to die. The problem is, if we were willing to do that, we wouldn't have any of those agencies to be replaced with the UBI. So it's a non-starter. It's moot. That's not a serious approach to this. The second approach, of course, is we just give them more money. Oh, 50,000 wasn't enough, here's another 10. And then next month, here's another 20, right? And you can sort of see how this makes a mockery of the whole idea, that there is some basic amount that you can live on, because for some people, it doesn't matter. They could spend it faster than you can give it to them. So that leaves us with the third option, which is, well, you spent all your money, and that's unfortunate, and you didn't spend it on the things you hoped you would. So you know what? We'll make sure that you don't get kicked out of your house, and we'll make sure that your house is heated so you don't freeze to death, and we'll make sure that you can get food so you don't starve, and so on. And so, and if you need medical care, we'll make sure that you can do that. Which is to say, go ahead next. all of the, this is just additive, right? All those agencies have to stay around because the UBI can be completely misspent, in which case you haven't really solved anything. You've sort of put a safety net on top of a safety net, and as people fall through the first one, the second one still has to be there. And so that's actually one of the things that I think people don't see, that this also applies to EFAs. I give the parents money and they just blow it. And now it's like, well, I blew all the money and I still need a place to put my kid because I got to work and I got to do all this. And okay, well, here's the public schools. So if in the back of anybody's mind is that EFAs are somehow going to supplant or replace public schools, that's just not going to happen. And you can see that because you look at what happens with UBIs, and it's exactly the same reasoning. It's the same logic. And you could, the backup position is, well, at least we'll just make enrollment smaller. And it's like, okay, but historically, I think everybody in this room knows that historically, as enrollments have plunged, costs have gone up. So that's not really a winning argument to say, yeah, we'll make the schools smaller and smaller. They will just spend more and more. So next. So freebie markets. So one of the things that has always annoyed me when people talk about EFAs in particular, and it would also apply to UBIs, but that's not such a hot topic of discussion, is you hear all the time about how free market competition is going to drive this. It's going to make it work. We're going to have free market competition. We'll give these parents money. These educating the providers, the schools will compete. Everything will get faster. It'll get cheaper, which is what happens when you have free market competition. And you'll hear them quoting Tommy Friedman saying things like, the most important single fact about free markets is two people don't actually engage in an exchange unless they both benefit. And I think that's true, and I think almost everybody in this room thinks it's true, and you can look around and you can see that this is true. Unfortunately, next, we're not really talking about that. So that's free market. Sorry, next. We're not really talking about that with EFAs or UBIs. We're talking about a third person, a third participant in there who's only there because he's being coerced, and he has to be coerced because he's not benefiting from this. And so I think we need a completely different name to distinguish between these two situations. I'm proposing the word freebie market. This is a freebie market where this guy is getting something which appears to be free, but it's not free at all because he's stealing money from that guy. Okay? And so the thing about freebie markets is they differ from free markets in some very crucial ways. So next. So one of the ways people talk about competition. That's the thing we want from those markets, is we want competition to drive things down. Well, there are at least two flavors of competition, right? And so one of them I would call, economists probably have names for this that I'm not aware of. But the first one I just think of as direct competition. I'm going to buy a chainsaw. There's a bunch of people out there, Husqvarna, Steel, Sears, whoever, who want to sell me a chainsaw, and they are directly competing against each other. I've already made the decision to buy it, and now they're competing on price and quality and service and whatever. Okay? At the same time, though, there's what I call indirect competition, which is if I buy the chainsaw, I can't stock up on ammo. I can't get those nice snow tires. Maybe I have to put up buying an ATV for another year, right? So in that sense, everybody is, in addition to competing with the people who make the same kind of thing, they're competing with everything else that somebody might buy, because you have to fit that into their budget. If it's not cheap enough or good enough, I'm not going to buy it at all. So the thing about freebie markets is they screw up both of these. They're both important. They're both essential for getting prices to come down and quality to go up, and freebie markets screw up both of them. So next. So in the case of direct competition, right, if I'm making cars or making chainsaws, something, and I'm directly competing with other products, then I have to bring my costs down and I have to raise quality or do both. But in a freebie market, that's not the case, because the money that people will have to spend for the thing that's the freebie is based on what the prices are now, right? If it's $20,000 to educate a kid, which is okay, that's the number. That's what we're going to start with. And there's no incentive for me to bring my cost down. I'd be an idiot to bring my cost down, because I know that as people run out of money, the taxpayers will make up the difference. So I never need to bring my prices down, whether I do anything about quality or not. So next. And in the case of indirect things, when there's just a million things I might be buying, in that case, what's happening is they're competing for what we might call budget space. I only have a certain amount of money, and so chainsaws, ammo, schools, tires, whatever, big screen TVs, I have to try to fit them all, and I'm balancing them off against each other. But as soon as I get into a freebie market, that item, school, medical care, whatever, is outside my budget. And I don't care what it costs. I literally don't care if I'm getting school for $3,000 in property taxes, no matter what it costs. Do I care if it costs $20,000 per student, $30,000, $50,000, $90,000? I don't care, right? It's not in my budget. I don't have to pay attention to it. That competition simply disappears, okay? And if the prices go up, the taxpayers will cover the difference. And so this idea that you're going to get free market competition is completely wrong. Those mechanisms just don't exist in a freebie market. It's a completely different animal. So next. So I think a lot of you have seen this. This is Tommy Friedman's thing about 4 ways money can be spent. Briefly, you can spend your money or somebody else's money, and you can spend it on yourself, or you can spend it on somebody else. And so it's a nice division here, because when you're spending your own money, that is a free market. You are, all those forms of competition are working to get you. And down here, where you're spending someone else's money, that's the freebie market right there. And the main thing you notice is it costs a lot more. Okay, whether or not you're trying to get the best things, everything in the freebie market costs a lot more, because competition is not taking the prices down. I also want to point out something that's important to me, that it's interesting that in this graph you see the words benefactor and beneficiary, because one of the things that drives me absolutely out of my mind is this argument that you hear all the time about how parents are the customers of the public school system. And it's like, that's not actually true. The parents are the beneficiaries. The customers are the taxpayers. The taxpayers are buying something from the public school system or the public education system or whatever it turns out to look like. And what they're buying is an educated citizenry. And it happens to be the case that parents and children are beneficiaries of this. But here's the thing about being a beneficiary. You're not calling the shots. You don't get to demand things. You take what you're given. And I think the fact that that sort of has turned everything on its head, and when you start thinking of the parents as customers, I think that's one of the things that's caused everything to fall apart. And it's one of the things I'd like to see changed. So next. Standard model. So a term for physics. Next. So we actually have, for a long time, we have taken the position that, we don't want poor people to be without certain things that they need, like food, like heat, like a place to sleep, okay? And so we don't want them to be denied access to something that's essential, but at the same time, if we're going to use tax money to help them avoid that, we don't want to see that money wasted. And in particular, what we really don't want to see is poor people subsidizing rich people, because that's just perverse to the point of being evil. So the model we've developed works like this. We come up with something, we say X. We have some X in mind, and it's a thing that everybody needs. And so the first thing you do is somebody goes, well, here's proof that I can't pay for X. And then you say, great, we have identified some providers of X that are relatively trustworthy. We'll give you some money, but you can only spend the money with one of those guys, and then you get what you need, okay? And if it's heat, then it's LIHEAP, right? There's a thing set up to help you with heat, if that's what you can't afford. There's medical care, there's food, there's housing. And so you have these things that already exist. And these are the things that Waldo wanted, he was thinking, oh, those will all go away when we have universal basic income, but of course they won't. And it's so well established that although nobody else is using the term standard model, I use it, and I would like that to eventually be in common use. So that is the standard model. So next. So the thing about the standard model is it follows three fairly simple and I think fairly obvious rules for how you spend money on poor people. The first rule is you don't give money to people who can get along without it. Okay, that seems straightforward. The second one is you don't appropriate money for one thing and then let it be spent on another thing. And the third one is you don't use it to pay for results that you don't actually get. Okay, and so we can take an EBT card and the SNAP program as an example of this, right? So on the one hand, it's like you don't give food stamps, you don't give EBTs to everybody. You give them to the people who wouldn't be able to pay for food otherwise. You don't, when you take your EBT card, you can't buy a magazine, you can't buy ammo, you can't buy, alcohol, you can't buy cigarettes with that. You can buy food, and you can only, not even every kind of food, only the kinds of food that people actually need to stay alive. And the third one is nobody goes into a store and says, well, here's a bunch of money for my EBT card, I hope you give me food, right? You get the food and then you pay for it, because that's how things work in the real world outside of schools. You get the thing and then you pay for it. And if you get the thing and there's something wrong with it, you get home and you open your food and there's ants or worms or something, you take it back, you get your money back. This is just how the world works. So if we applied this to education, if we just said education is the thing everybody should have, and some people can't afford it, so why don't we use the standard model to pay for it, right? And we would end up with something that we could call, for example, educate. And it is, there are people who provide ways for you to become educated, and if you can afford it, you pay for it, and if you can't, we actually help you, okay? And this is basically what Tommy Friedman had in mind, right? That you would have what's essentially a free market, people using their own money to pay for things and getting all the great benefits of competition, but there would be some small number of people who would have a barrier to entry, and you help them get into that market so they can get essentials, not everything, but essentials for themselves and their families. So this is actually, this is what we should be doing. So next. But for some reason, so that's the standard model over here. Here's what I call the substandard model. For some reason, when we talk about education, when X is education, everything goes out the window, and we suddenly decide, what we should do is we should set up an entitlement, because we want to make sure that poor people are paying for rich people, and we should actually operate that with a government monopoly, and we should pretend that providing something means you have to produce it, which in any other sphere seems crazy. It's sort of like if suddenly the government realized, oh my God, there are people who can't have food, we'd better start growing food as a government, right? And when we grow it, we'll give it to everybody, which makes no sense at all. So clearly, public schools violate all three of the rules that make the standard model work, right? Any entitlement where you're just giving everything to everybody, it automatically ends up giving things to people who don't need it, and worse, it ends up you have the poor subsidizing the rich. The second rule, you appropriate money for an education, and right now, there are so many things that it's paying for, in terms of therapy and hobbies and music and art and, social events, that almost none of it is going to education. So, and the third rule is, of course, we instead of the normal commerce model, we use the pay and pray model, where we're like, here's $23,000 per student, we hope you educate those kids. And then when you don't, it's like, well, okay, let's try it again next year, and let's try it again next year, and there's no sense that you should actually pay after the kid has been educated. Jody would remind me that there's a charter school, VLAX, that actually works on that other model, which is they don't get paid unless the kid actually learns something. So it's not like it's impossible, it's just nobody does it. So next. So what I would say is, if we want to propose something, here's a new way that we should do something for poor people. The very first thing you should do is actually see if it's better than the standard model. If it offers more or somehow is better, or at least isn't any worse. And so, we could try that for UBIs and EFA, for UBI and EFA. And so next. So clearly, UBI fails on everything, right? The whole point of this is to give it to everybody, regardless of whether they need it or not. You're just giving them cash. We have no idea what they're spending it on, and so consequently, we have no idea whether they're actually getting anything besides, lottery tickets or cigarettes or whatever. So just UBI is just a complete failure in terms of the rules that govern the standard model. So next. EFAs are a little trickier, partly because there's so much still being legislated, right? Are we only going to give money to those who need it? Well, right now, one of the big pushes in Concord and in other states is we should make them universal. We should give them to everybody, right? So if I'm a guy, I make $2 million a year. I send my kids to the best private schools. Hey, what the hell? Give me an extra $5,000 per kid. Why not? What's that going to accomplish exactly? Nothing. So that's still up in the air, right? Not just in New Hampshire, but everywhere. Right. Is it going to be used for education? And this is something, again, it's being negotiated, and so you find these lists of providers. But as you look through the list of providers, you find things like, oh, you can use this money for karate lessons. And it's like, under what model of an adequate education should you be paying for some kid to learn karate? Or maybe not even learn it, just go to lessons, right? Maybe he learns it, maybe he doesn't. And that's the final part where they clearly fail. And this is something where the proponents of EFAs are really pushing back. You should not have tests. You should not make us prove anything. We shouldn't have to have just trust the parents. We'll do the right thing. And don't worry about whether your money's actually accomplishing anything that it's supposed to do. So they fail on that. As I said, these are open, and I'm pretty sure they're going to end up with X's once this is all, the dust settles. So the thing I take away from a table like this is that when people even start to talk about EFAs as a solution to anything, my feeling is that we should actually just say, yeah, why are we not using the standard model? Why don't we actually try to move towards the standard model, since it would actually accomplish the things that we want to do? We want to make sure that poor people can get things that they need. We want to make sure the money doesn't get wasted, right? And we want to make sure that we actually get results. Why would we not do that? Why would we try anything that fails on any of those three things? So, next. So, we're going to add, I'm going to summarize. So, next. So, in summary, the things that the points I've tried to make are, one, spending for EFAs in particular is completely additive. Nothing is being saved. There's no money following anybody. Nothing is being replaced. This is all new spending. And anybody who tells you that something's being saved either doesn't understand what's going on or is hoping you don't. So the second thing is, neither UBI or EFAs are going to replace anything. They are purely additive in terms of functionality. All you can do is put another safety net on top of the first safety net, but the first safety net has to stay there, okay? Unless, of course, as I said, we make failure legal, but we're not going to do that. So, third, UBI and EFAs do not use free market competition. They don't. And to call what they use free market competition is an abuse of the language. And so, at the very least, I would hope people would start calling on that and saying, that's not a free market. When you steal money from somebody in order to engage in this, that is not a free market. And to extrapolate from a free market to that situation is just a crazy categorical error. And so finally, neither UBIs nor EFAs follow the basic ideas behind the standard model, which I hope you'll agree with me are pretty clear and pretty obvious. They express very clear, substantial, useful goals that we would have. And these don't follow them. These are completely outside of that. So, I'm sure that EFAs and UBI are a solution to some problem. This is not actually the problems that we have, right? And I can say that with confidence because, as I sort of pointed out earlier, we don't actually know what the problems we're trying to solve are. We have not had that discussion, right? And this is something that came up in Croydon. We wanted to have a discussion about what's the point of education? Why are we doing this? Why is that guy paying to educate that kids? And people are like, oh, you just want to close the schools. That it's not a rhetorical question. If we're doing these things, we should be able to say why we're doing them and what we're hoping to accomplish, right? This is not polemic. This is not politics. This is just trying to take stock of what you're doing and figure out whether maybe you should be doing something else, right? And so until we've had those conversations about, well, who should get this money and where should we take the money from? Should it come from this pocket or that pocket, and can we spend it on this, can we spend it on that, are pointless. But in fact, they're worse than pointless, because while you're having those conversations, you are not having the conversations you need to have. So this was, I think people have seen Glenn Cordelli, right? Reading, I don't know how many of you saw this. He's in the house, the well of the house, and he's reading from.
This is yesterday.
This is yesterday.
Oh,
Thursday.
I thought it was
Thursday,
Derek Holden
sorry.
reading.
Thursday.
No, this was, I don't know what day.
It was Thursday.
He's reading the library book.
Right, so he's reading
Yeah.
the library
Yeah,
books,
sorry.
right?
The
And here's
tame
the-
ones.
Okay.
Super tame ones.
But here's the thing that just killed me. It seemed like such a missed opportunity. He's up there, and everybody's getting upset. You can't read this language. This is dirty. We don't want to hear it, whatever. And he's like, I wish he would have just stopped and said, wow, wouldn't it be great if you could all get this upset about the fact that fewer than half of kids can read or do math at proficiency? Why are you not upset about that? And that's because we keep having these conversations instead of those conversations. Okay? The more we talk about money, the more we talk about who should cough it up and who should get it and under what conditions and what paperwork we have to do and whether we set an account up and should it be run by a government office or should it be run by Kate Baker or whatever. Every minute that we spend talking about that is a minute that we are not talking about what matters. Okay? So, right, oh, yes, this is important. We should stop lying about the fact that money is being saved, okay, because it's not. And so to make that the centerpiece of the argument is just completely wrong. Having said that, I do want to point out there are two situations where EFAs actually can save money. And those are, in fact, the situations where the district does pay for the student and not to run a school. The first one is in a case where a district doesn't provide certain grades and they have to tuition kids out. So a kid could come to Croydon, for instance, and say, well, instead of spending $15,000 to send me to Sunapee, just give me $5,000 and I'll be on my way. Okay, that would actually save money. That's real savings, but that almost never happens. The second one is where you have a special needs kid who cannot have his needs met within the infrastructure of the school he's in, and they have to send him somewhere. Oh, go to Crotchet Mountain, for $100,000 a year. If he stops spending the $100,000 and takes the $5,000, that's an actual savings. And there are some states, I think Montana, Mississippi, and Florida, who are going down that road. And they're saying we are setting up these funds for kids with special needs, or as they say in Florida, unique abilities. So those are cases, but they're cases because, as I said, that is where they're paying for the kid. So when you're paying directly for a kid, yes, an ESA makes sense. But that's actually a very small number of cases. And it's certainly not, compatible with the idea that we should just give the money to everybody and let them do whatever they want. So, last slide. Sorry, you can go after that one. Yeah, this is in a nutshell. So, does everybody know this joke?
Tell it.
I'll assume you don't. So a cop's walking down the street and he sees a guy crawling around under a lamppost. And he's like, well, what are you doing? He's like, well, I lost my wallet. I'm looking for it. And the cop goes, well, I'll help you. So they look around for a while, and finally the cop's like, we've looked everywhere. And he says, are you sure that you lost your wallet here? And he says, no, I lost it over in the park. And the cop's like, so why are you looking here? He's like, well, the light's better here. Okay? And this, to me, explains about half of what happens in school and politics around schools. But the point, and it's sort of the point I was making earlier, is every minute that this guy spends crawling around under the lamppost is a minute he's not getting any closer to his wallet. Every minute that we spend fighting over money, especially money involved in EFAs, is a minute that we are not spending talking about what it means to educate somebody, why we should be doing it, how we'll know if we're doing it successfully. and what is the case for actually taking money from somebody to give it to somebody else. So I would like us to, I think of EFAs as a distraction. That's sort of the summary that I came up with. They are just taking us away. They're a slightly different path than public schools, and they're taking us in the wrong direction because we are not talking about what matters. Thank you.